Paul, for putting together and mapping all the processes that the community is currently involved, but you also explained quite a lot of terms like the multi-stakeholder term. What does it mean? Does it mean it's bottom-up and inclusive? Does it have a fancy name, multi-stakeholderism? Has it become a religion, or what are we doing next? And in those, since we've heard about these trends, I think it would be really good to have some practical, if you like, play here. What will happen with these processes in next 5 years? What will happen with this process in the next 5 years? How do you see internet governance landscape shaping? I'm going to ask Vladimir to talk to us about the risk, whether he thinks governments will take over, whether it's going to be a corporate world, how multi-stakeholder processes are going to develop, and see, if you want, you can play a devil's advocate, but let's try and see where we're going over the next 5 years. What are the consequences of different processes and frameworks for internet governance, and what are the risks?
Thanks, Des. I purposely have a suit in order to have my hat of the government here. I'm not a government. I'll try to play a devil's advocate. We work a lot with diplomats and government, so we have a bit of a mindset of, or insight into the mindset of the government. And I want to kind of a piggyback on what Paul mentioned in two iterations. Firstly, he said policy, public policies for governments, and I would say yes, governments have the legitimacy to do that. And secondly, we, technical community, need to have a say. Well, yes, technical community needs to have a say, but the decisions are on the governments. Simply democracy works that way. And the main question that I pose, and we keep hearing in this internet governance debates, is there a cyber space, or it's actually the real space? And even the ICANN CEO said in a couple of times, there is no cyber. Cyber is everywhere around, it's part of our lives, it's part of reality. So in these terms, it should be governed in the same way as the real world is. There is no difference in that. Ultimately, we are all flesh and blood, humans behind the computers. So the trend I see, and I see it even without my hat now, playing a devil's advocate, is that the whole internet governance might easily slip in the next couple of years strongly into government's control of the governments on the global level. Let me give you a couple of examples. One was 2 years ago, was the ITU World Conference on on International Telecommunications. The WICIT, the famous WICIT, another acronym. You should start noting down the acronyms. WSIS, IGF, IANA, CRISP, ITU, WICIT. It's not only the technical community that has acronyms, also the diplomats. So the WICIT process ended up with kind of a Cold War, if you can put it that way, when it comes to international telecommunications, where we had 50 countries against the new mandate of the ITU, and those were mostly the EU countries, US and allies, and about 80 countries in favor of the new kind of a mandate of the ITU, International Telecommunication Union, which takes over a little bit of work on the internet policies. So that's the start where the governments simply put a stronger grip. Paul mentioned WSIS plus 10. This is the 10th year of the World Summit of Information Society, and he mentioned the meeting in December. The review of the WSIS happens in December in New York, not even in Geneva, and that's a difference because Geneva is mostly oriented to getting more inputs from other stakeholders and missions. New York is the high level. So there is a close meeting of the governments in December discussing the end of the WSIS, and before that, during the General Assembly of the United Nations, discussing the continuation or not of the Internet Governance Forum. There is currently no mechanism how civil society, technical community, or corporate sector can input to that. There are discussions that this mechanism will be built in the next months, but you can imagine, knowing the pace of diplomatic work, which is very slow, that within the couple of months, it's hardly anything that can be done. So that's a big risk. IANA. If IANA transition fails till the September, we will have a number of countries which will point a finger and say, we told you, this doesn't work. The whole thing about multi-stakeholderism doesn't work. let's see the governments doing a little bit better. After all, the root zone, internet numbers and names is something that's a global good. And we should have a global governance over that, and countries should have a strong say in that. Then last week we had a global conference on cyberspace led by the Dutch government, discussing cybersecurity and internet governance to some extent. It was led by the government. It was with some of the ministers. Civil society was there, technical committee was there, corporate sector was there, but it was driven by the government. In 2 weeks, we are going to have a Freedom Online conference about online freedoms, also driven by the governments. Now, quite in an open manner, but driven by the governments. So there is a huge trend of governments taking over. Now, to finish with my hat of a government, I would say this is actually very good. Because states have the legitimacy, democracy, well, you've chosen us, right? We have responsibility, we as governments, have a responsibility for protecting users. That means consumer protection online. There has to be a mechanism of complaints if eBay, Google, Facebook make trouble to you. So the government is responsible for that. Responsible for everyone to have access. Responsible for net neutrality. Responsible for protecting users' online data. In Google, terms of references which no one reads. Responsible for making Facebook and the others to actually share the data about the possible online criminals in order for the law enforcement to be done. The intergovernmental model is also fair. Think about small countries, Pacific countries, Caribbean islands, well, even Serbia, Macedonia, Montenegro. Those are small countries. We don't have capacities here to be in these global processes. We don't have people, we don't have money to travel around the world, but we have missions around the world. So it makes sense that the governments are involved there. And we can also prevent fragmentation. We can also prevent dominance of the corporate sector, of the big corporations, oligopolies, Google's, Facebook's, Twitter's, and the others. So there is quite a good reason why governments should be there. And after all, we have some system which already exists. ITU, UNESCO, UN system. Shouldn't we use it? Well, that's kind of a provocation back to your face.
I have a microphone. Okay.
So you're doing this really well, Vladimir. I wonder if anyone from the audience have an immediate reaction to your proposal, how the internet should be run and why the multi-governmental model is good. Surely what we heard from Paul was saying the opposite. The internet is run and it's a collaborative effort of network operators, institutions and private sector that is very capable of running the internet, whilst the government are just trying to seize more control. So I'll maybe ask Paul to contravene as well and give an opposite view. I'm not saying the corporate and private view, the corporate players should be running it, but I just would like to go back to the theme of multi-stakeholderism. Why does bottom-up policy-making decision and collaboration work in this space, and aren't governments trying to ruin that? Maybe first, if you can reply to that. Aren't governmental systems going to ruin what we currently have, and do they have enough of expertise to regulate the space?
Well, no, we heard somewhere no. Before that, as I said, cyber is a new thing, but it's nothing so new. We already had discussions about nuclear energy, discussions about space. There are many things which were new at the time. This one is not so new. It's specific currently, but it's something that the governments can also get the expertise. But what I think is that we have the UN system institutions, or the global institutions, even the regional ones, which have been dealing quite well with, let's say, law on the sea, law on the open space. So I don't see why governments wouldn't be able to handle the regulations of the cyberspace. That doesn't mean that the other stakeholders and the knowledge which exists in the technical community and corporate sector shouldn't be taken into account. But that's the limit, taken into account, or kind of help us understand as governments better how to deal with that and draw attention to some specific dangers. But again, there are the systems which are working. ITU works perfectly. It doesn't have any glitches thus far. It has been setting the standards for internet for years. I don't see why it shouldn't be like that in future as well.